December 1944. The sky over Germany belongs to predators. High above the frozen clouds, a lone P-51 Mustang drifts away from formation, trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. From a distance, it looks like another damaged escort falling out of the bomber stream. Another American pilot about to die. 4 German fighters notice immediately. They circle downward like wolves. Over the radio, the Mustang's wingman reports the obvious. Red 3 is hit. He's losing power. Inside the formation, no one questions it. Aircraft get hit every mission. Engines fail. Pilots die. At 20,000 feet, survival is often decided in seconds. But what the squadron cannot see from a mile away is that the smoke is fading. The engine is stabilizing. And the wounded aircraft is not helpless at all. In less than 2 minutes, the hunters will become the hunted. 4 German fighters will fall out of the winter sky. And a quiet pilot nobody fully understood will begin rewriting the mathematics of air combat. The winter of 1944 is one of the coldest Europe has seen in decades. At altitude, the air becomes brutal. Ice forms along cockpit canopies. Breath freezes before it reaches the oxygen mask. Machine gun mechanisms stiffen, oil thickens, and metal contracts until aircraft groan under the stress. It is also the winter of the Luftwaffe's final stand. Germany has lost the initiative in the war, but its remaining fighter pilots are among the most experienced in the world. Many have flown more than 100 combat missions. They know the strengths of their aircraft and the weaknesses of the Allied formations that cross their skies every day. American bombers continue striking deeper into the Reich. Synthetic oil plants, rail yards, aircraft factories. The 8th Air Force sends hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses across Germany, escorted by long-range fighters whose job is simple: keep the bombers alive long enough to reach the target and return home. Every mission becomes an equation. Fuel range, ammunition, altitude, enemy interceptors. Get the variables wrong, and the sky erases you. There is no middle ground. The 357th Fighter Group flies out of RAF Leiston along the English coast. The airfield is little more than mud and steel runway plates hammered into the earth. Mustangs sit in sandbagged revetments, their aluminum skins covered in frost each morning before sunrise. Ground crews work through the night. Mechanics tighten bolts with numb fingers, replace damaged control cables, patch bullet holes with sheets of aluminum. The air smells of aviation fuel, burned cordite, and wet wool. Inside the ready room, pilots gather around a potbelly stove. Maps cover the walls. Intelligence officers brief them quickly. Targets, enemy strength, weather, expected losses. The word acceptable appears often in wartime briefings. It is a great deal of work. Captain Robert M. Wilcox usually sits near the back. He is 23 years old, thin, quiet, and watchful. His hands look more like a mechanic's than a fighter pilot's. Scarred knuckles, strong fingers, the hands of someone used to tools and machinery. His combat logbook shows 37 missions and 0 kills. Other pilots in the squadron have already claimed victories. Some chase German fighters aggressively every time the formations collide. Wilcox rarely fires his guns. Not because he cannot, because he chooses not to. He watches. He studies. He waits. Some pilots call him lucky. In nearly 40 missions, he has never been hit once. In a war where aluminum and flesh meet high-velocity steel every day, that kind of luck draws attention. Some believe he hangs back during fights. Others think he is simply cautious. A few suspect something else entirely. That Wilcox is working something out in his head. An equation no one else has noticed yet. The mission briefing for December 12th targets a synthetic oil facility near Stuttgart. Destroying oil production means grounding German aircraft, which means fewer fighters tomorrow. 48 Mustangs launch before sunrise. Engines cough blue flame into the darkness as the aircraft climb into the pale winter sky. They form up over the English Channel before turning east toward France. Below them, the landscape is silent and white. Above them, contrails stretch across the sky like chalk lines on a frozen blackboard. Wilcox flies in the trailing element. His wingman is a young lieutenant from Ohio, 20 years old, eager, and terrified. The day before the mission, he asked Wilcox how to survive long enough to finish a combat tour. Wilcox gave him only 2 pieces of advice. Stay close. Watch the sun. He said nothing more. At altitude, Words are cheap. Physics is not. The bomber formation appears ahead like a distant gray cloud. Nearly 200 B-17s, stacked into massive combat boxes. Their contrails braid the sky. The Mustangs slide into escort positions above and behind them. Radio chatter fades. Every pilot scans the horizon, searching for the tiny glint of canopy glass that signals approaching danger. The Luftwaffe attacks over the Rhine. They appear exactly where experienced pilots expect them. Out of the sun, dozens of Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s diving toward the bomber stream. The radios erupt instantly. Bandits high. 12 o'clock. Break right. The formation dissolves into dozens of separate fights. Each engagement becomes a geometry problem solved in seconds. Or not solved at all. Wilcox watches a Bf 109 flash past his canopy close enough to see the German pilot turning his head inside the cockpit. He does not chase. Instead, he climbs, gaining altitude, observing. His wingman follows uncertainly. The entire battle lasts 4 minutes. 2 Mustangs fall. 1 B-17 drops out of formation, trailing fire. Then the German fighters break away and dive east toward home. The bombers reform. The sky grows quiet again. Wilcox has not fired a single shot. That night at Leiston, the debriefing is tense. Pilots slump in their chairs, replaying the fight in their heads. Gun camera footage rolls across a projection screen. Claims are filed. Losses confirmed. Wilcox submits a flight report consisting of 1 short paragraph. No contact. No ammunition expended. The squadron commander reads it silently, then glances up. He says nothing. Later that night in the barracks, someone mutters that Lucky Wilcox is too lucky for his own good. Wilcox does not respond. Instead, he sits at a small desk with a notebook. Inside the pages are diagrams. Angles, speeds, turn radiuses, energy states, the arithmetic of aerial predation. Robert Wilcox grew up in Decatur, Illinois. His father ran a small machine shop. His mother taught piano lessons. Their house smelled like cutting oil and sheet music. Wilcox was a quiet child, observant, the sort of boy who took apart clocks simply to understand how they worked. At 16, he built a small wind tunnel in the family garage using a salvaged electric fan and wooden frames. Inside it, he tested small balsa wood wings, adjusting their angles and recording lift measurements on graph paper. His father once asked what he planned to do with the results. Wilcox shrugged. He was curious. That was reason enough. He enrolled at the University of Illinois in 1939 to study mechanical engineering. He joined the university flying club not out of romance, but practicality. Flying was simply applied physics, a machine moving through air, an equation that could be tested. When the war began, he enlisted in the Army Air Forces without waiting for the draft. He told his mother the decision was logical. The country needed pilots. He had the aptitude. She asked him if he was afraid. Wilcox thought for a moment before answering. Fear, he said quietly, is a variable, not a constant. Training began in Texas. Wilcox soloed after 7 hours of flight instruction. His instructors noted his precision. They also noted something else, a lack of aggression. During mock dogfights, he rarely attacked recklessly. Instead, he observed the engagement, measured distances, studied angles. One instructor wrote in his file, technically proficient, lacks killer instinct. Another added, thinks too much, may hesitate under fire. Wilcox graduated in the middle of his class. He requested fighters. They gave him Mustangs. And in the summer of 1944, he arrived in England. Most fighter pilots thought about combat as individual duels. One pilot against another. Skill, nerve, courage. Wilcox saw something else. A system. Altitude equals stored energy. Speed equals maneuver potential. Every engagement had patterns, and patterns could be predicted. By the winter of 1944, he believed he had discovered something important. But proving it would require something dangerous. To defeat a predator, you first have to convince him that you are prey. By the winter of 1944, the air war over Germany had become brutally mathematical. The Luftwaffe no longer tried to dominate the sky the way it had earlier in the war. Instead, its remaining fighter units used a strategy built on speed and precision. They attacked in waves, slash through the bomber formation, fire, then dive away before the escorts could react. Hit and run. The tactic worked. Bomber losses climbed. American fighter doctrine remained strict. Stay with the bombers. Do not chase. Protection was the mission. Glory was irrelevant. But Robert Wilcox had begun to see a flaw in the system. The escorts were disciplined, predictable, and predictable opponents were easy to plan against. German pilots knew exactly how American fighters would behave, which meant the Germans could choose when and where the fight happened. Wilcox believed the advantage could be reversed. The enemy didn't need to be stronger. They only needed to be more certain. So he began experimenting. The first real test happened during an escort mission over Frankfurt. A German attack scattered the formation briefly, the sky filling with contrails and tracer fire. Wilcox drifted away from his element. Not far, just far enough to look separated. Then he did something no American fighter pilot had been trained to do. He reduced power. The Mustang slowed. Its nose dipped slightly. To anyone watching from above, the aircraft looked damaged. His wingman panicked immediately. "Lead, you're hit. You're smoking." Wilcox simply clicked the radio twice. "Stand by." Two Messerschmitt 109s noticed him. They peeled away from the larger fight. A crippled Mustang drifting alone in the sky was the easiest victory imaginable. 400 yards. 300. Wilcox didn't move. 200 yards. The Germans opened fire. Tracer rounds flashed past his wings. Then Wilcox slammed the throttle forward. The Mustang surged forward like a released spring. He rolled into a brutal left turn, pulling 6 gs. The German fighters overshot instantly. Their closing speed had been too high. Wilcox flipped the aircraft inverted, pulled down through the turn, and suddenly found himself behind the trailing 109. 2 seconds of gunfire. The canopy shattered. The German aircraft rolled away trailing smoke. The second German fighter tried to climb. Wilcox didn't chase. Instead, he dove away and accelerated. The fight was over. No dogfight. No prolonged turning battle. Just bait. Commitment. Execution. His wingman barely spoke on the flight home. At the debriefing, Wilcox calmly filed the claim. 1 enemy fighter destroyed. The gun camera confirmed it. The squadron commander asked what happened. Wilcox answered simply, "Energy advantage." The commander nodded. But the other pilots had already heard the story. Lucky Wilcox, the quiet pilot who pretended to be wounded and turned the tables. Some thought it was clever. Others thought it was reckless. One captain called it a stunt. Wilcox didn't argue. That night he wrote in his notebook, "Test 1, successful." 3 days later he tried again. Same idea, different result. This time the German pilot circled cautiously above him. Watching. Suspicious. Wilcox aborted immediately and rejoined formation. No damage. No loss. But another lesson learned. The tactic worked against aggressive pilots. Not cautious ones. He refined the model. You couldn't fake damage too early. You couldn't make it obvious. The aircraft had to look wounded, but believable. Smoke. Instability. Slight loss of altitude. Enough weakness to trigger predatory instinct. But not enough to lose control. The trick also required something else. A wingman who understood that silence on the radio meant trust, not disaster. Eventually Wilcox brought the idea to his squadron commander. He asked permission to test the maneuver deliberately. The commander listened carefully. Wilcox explained everything. Energy states. Closure speeds. Overshoot mechanics. Psychological triggers. The commander sat quietly for a long moment. Then he said, "You get one chance. If it fails, we forget the whole idea." Wilcox nodded. He didn't mention that he had already tested it twice, or that the mathematics suggested it should work almost every time against the right opponent. December 19th, 1944. The target was Kassel, a rail yard feeding supplies to German forces. Weather conditions were poor. Low clouds. Ice forming on the wings. The mission nearly canceled, but the bombers launched anyway. Before takeoff, Wilcox briefed his wingman. "If I call trail," he said, "drop back and climb high. Don't follow me down. Just watch." The young lieutenant frowned. "What exactly are you planning?" Wilcox shrugged. "An experiment." The flight into Germany was rough. Turbulence shook the formation. Cloud layers closed in overhead. Below them the ground blurred into white forests and frozen rivers. The bombers reached the target. Flak erupted. Black bursts filled the sky. Bomb bay doors opened. Then the German fighters arrived. 30 aircraft or more diving out of the clouds. The radio exploded with warnings. Bandits high. Bandits 12 o'clock. Engage. The sky dissolved into chaos. Contrails twisted like torn threads. Machine gun tracers flashed everywhere. The bomber stream became a battlefield. Wilcox spotted 4 German fighters turning toward a damaged B-17. Instead of attacking directly, he drifted toward the second pair. Then he reduced power again. The Mustang slowed. He toggled a makeshift smoke system he had quietly installed the night before. White vapor streamed from the engine cowling. Over the radio, his wingman shouted, "Lead is hit. Lead's trailing smoke." The German pilots saw exactly what Wilcox wanted them to see. A crippled Mustang. Easy prey. They abandoned their bomber attack and dove toward him. One high, one low. Perfect bracketing. Wilcox counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Then he struck. Smoke off. Throttle forward. The Mustang surged ahead. He pulled sharply into the lead German. The Messerschmitt pilot realized too late. Wilcox was already inside his turning circle. A short burst. 30 rounds. The wing root exploded. The German aircraft flipped into a spin. The second German overshot. His speed carried him past the fight. Wilcox climbed after him. Another burst. The cockpit shattered. The fighter tumbled backward. Elapsed time. 40 seconds. His wingman shouted over the radio. He got 2. But Wilcox wasn't finished. He saw another flight of German fighters circling east. They hadn't noticed him yet. Wilcox climbed toward the sun. Altitude building. Energy returning. Then he ran the trick again. Only this time he changed the pattern. Instead of looking wounded, he looked panicked, breaking away from formation, diving erratically. 3 German fighters took the bait. They closed fast. Wilcox waited, measured their angles, their speed, their commitment. Then he pulled into a climbing spiral. The lead German followed. The other 2 tried to cut him off. At the top of the climb, Wilcox rolled inverted and dove straight back through them. Head on. Pure geometry. He fired. The lead 109 exploded. Wilcox threaded between the remaining 2. Both Germans scattered instinctively. One left, one right. Wilcox chopped throttle, dropped flaps, and whipped the Mustang around in a brutal turn. His vision gray from the G-force. He lined up on the left-hand fighter. Fired. The aircraft rolled away trailing fuel. The last German ran. Wilcox let him go. He climbed calmly back toward the bomber formation. 4 German fighters destroyed. Less than 2 minutes. His wingman rejoined beside him, breathing hard into the radio. The bomber stream was already pulling away toward home. The remaining German fighters scattered east. Low on fuel. Confused. Wilcox slid back into escort position as if nothing unusual had happened. No one on the radio said a word. Back at RAF Leiston, the debriefing room was unusually quiet. Normally pilots talked over one another, arguing about angles, speed, or who had seen what during a fight. But that afternoon, most of the men sat silently while the intelligence officer threaded the gun camera film into the projector. The lights dimmed. The footage flickered onto the screen. First came the moment where Wilcox's Mustang appeared to be dying in the sky, smoke pouring from the engine, the aircraft drifting downward like a wounded bird. Then the German fighters appeared behind him, 2 black silhouettes closing fast. A few seconds later, the film showed something none of the pilots in the room had ever seen before. The Mustang suddenly accelerated. It snapped into a violent turn. The first German fighter filled the gun sight. The film flashed with gunfire. Then the aircraft disintegrated. Another overshoot. Another burst. Another German fighter falling. The room stayed silent even after the projector stopped. The intelligence officer counted slowly. 4 confirmed. The squadron commander leaned back in his chair. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. Has anyone else tried this? No one answered. The commander turned toward Wilcox. Write it up. Everything. Setup, timing, execution. I want the report on my desk tomorrow. Wilcox simply nodded. The report was 3 pages long, typed carefully, diagrams included. Wilcox titled it, Exploitation of Predatory Instinct in Enemy Fighter Tactics. He explained the concept methodically. German fighter pilots, particularly the experienced veterans still flying in 1944, were aggressive but efficient. They preferred targets that appeared weak, damaged aircraft, stragglers, or fighters separated from their formation. Such targets promised quick kills with minimal risk. That aggression created a predictable reaction. If an American fighter could convincingly simulate damage, the German pilot would commit to an attack profile assuming the target was helpless. But the assumption was wrong. The American aircraft still had energy, still had speed, still had control. And when the German fighter closed too quickly, its higher speed created an overshoot. At that moment, the attacker became vulnerable. Wilcox described the required variables: altitude, speed differential, closure rate, turn radius. The margin of success was narrow, but repeatable. He included performance charts for the P-51 Mustang, showing acceleration curves and climb rates. He even referenced practice flights he had conducted earlier using friendly aircraft to simulate enemy attackers. The final sentence in the report was simple: the enemy expects weakness. The tactic succeeds by turning expectation into vulnerability. The squadron commander read the document twice. Then he walked it to group headquarters. The group commander studied the diagrams with the operations officer. They spread the papers across a table and traced the geometry of the maneuver step by step. The operations officer frowned. "It's dangerous," he said. "If the trick fails, the pilot is slow, low, and alone." The group commander asked one question: "How many times has Wilcox used it?" "6, someone answered. 6 kills. No damage." The room went quiet. Finally, the group commander made his decision. "Train 2 more pilots. Volunteers only. We'll test it on the next deep mission. If it works, we expand it." 3 days later, 2 captains sat with Wilcox in a briefing room. He explained not just the mechanics, but the psychology. "You have to sell the illusion," he told them. "If you look like you're pretending, they'll see it. Damaged aircraft don't fly smoothly. They skid. They wobble. They lose altitude." One captain asked the obvious question: "What if they don't bite?" "Then you abort," Wilcox said calmly. "No loss." The second captain asked something else: "What if they're smarter than we think?" Wilcox shrugged slightly. "Then it becomes a normal fight. But most of the time they're reacting, not thinking. And reaction is predictable." They practiced over the North Sea. One Mustang played the wounded aircraft. The others acted as attackers. The first few attempts failed. The timing was wrong. The bait looked fake. But gradually the pilots began to understand the rhythm. On the 6th run, both captains executed the maneuver perfectly. Now it was time to test it in combat. December 23, 1944. The target was a German airfield near Munich. Intelligence predicted heavy resistance. The Luftwaffe was defending its remaining bases with everything it had left. The bomber formation crossed the Alps under a cold blue sky. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly below. Then the German fighters appeared. 30 aircraft, maybe more. They attacked head-on. A classic attempt to break the escort fighters and scatter the bombers. Wilcox's flight was positioned on the southern flank. He saw a group of Focke-Wulf 190s climbing toward them. He keyed the radio. Execute. 3 Mustangs broke formation, each trailing smoke, each wobbling as if fatally damaged. The German fighters saw them immediately. 3 wounded aircraft drifting alone. Easy kills. They dove. The trap closed. Wilcox struck first. His Mustang snapped into a climbing turn. Gunfire flashed. A German fighter exploded. One captain rolled under another attacker and fired at close range. Another German aircraft disintegrated. The second captain caught 2 more during overshoots. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds. 5 German fighters fell out of the sky. The rest broke away, confused and scattered. The bomber formation continued unbroken. Not a single B-17 was lost to enemy fighters that day. At the debriefing, the group commander watched the gun camera footage carefully. When it ended, he looked at the pilots in the room. "We start teaching this tomorrow." Within a week, every pilot in the 357th Fighter Group knew the tactic. Some called it playing possum. Others called it the wounded duck. Official reports used a more formal phrase: energy deception maneuver. Other fighter groups began hearing about it. Pilots visited Leiston to observe the briefings. By January 1945, variations of the tactic were spreading across the 8th Air Force. German intelligence noticed something was wrong. Surviving Luftwaffe pilots reported that American fighters were pretending to be damaged, then attacking. Warnings were issued. Do not engage wounded aircraft without caution. But combat rarely allowed caution, and hesitation in aerial combat was often fatal. The tactic continued to work. Wilcox flew 16 more missions. He scored 9 additional victories, almost all using variations of the same deception. He never lost a wingman. He never suffered serious damage. Other pilots began calling him the professor. He didn't seem to mind. In his notebook, he wrote a single sentence beneath a diagram of the maneuver. Predators hesitate when prey stops behaving like prey. The statistical impact was dramatic. During December 1944, the 357th Fighter Group's kill-to-loss ratio doubled. Bomber losses during missions escorted by trained bait flights dropped sharply. Reports were forwarded to 8th Air Force Headquarters. In early 1945, a training memorandum circulated among fighter units. It explained the concept of deception through energy manipulation. Wilcox's name was not mentioned, but every pilot in the 357th knew where the idea had come from. Robert Wilcox completed his combat tour in March 1945. He finished the war with 13 confirmed victories. When offered promotion and a training command position, he declined. He simply said he wanted to go home and finish his engineering degree. After the war, analysts studying air combat records noticed something unusual. A single pilot's idea had quietly spread across an entire theater of war. But the story remained largely unknown. There were thousands of pilots, thousands of battles. Many innovations were lost in the noise of victory. Wilcox returned to Illinois. He completed his degree. He married a woman he met in a university library. He worked for Caterpillar, designing hydraulic systems. He raised 3 children. He rarely spoke about the war. In the 1970s, a researcher contacted him while writing a history of the 357th Fighter Group. Wilcox agreed to a brief interview. The researcher asked if he considered himself a hero. Wilcox shook his head. "I was just a pilot who paid attention." The researcher asked what the war had taught him. Wilcox thought for a moment. Then he answered quietly, "The most dangerous enemy is predictability, yours or theirs. And survival isn't about being fearless. It's about being rational when rationality is hardest." Robert Wilcox died in 1991 at the age of 70. His obituary mentioned his work as an engineer and his service during World War II. It did not mention the tactic. It did not mention the kills. But his notebooks survived. Today they sit in an archive at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Ohio. Researchers sometimes request them. The diagrams are still precise. The handwriting still neat. The mathematics still correct. Because in modern air combat training, the principle of energy deception remains fundamental. Many pilots study it. Few know where it began. But long ago, in a frozen sky over Germany, a quiet engineer from Illinois proved something important. War is not always won by the boldest pilot. Sometimes it is won by the one who understands the equation first and knows exactly when to let the predator believe the fight is already over.